At the Rideau Valley Heritage Foundation dinner, a woman sat alone near the east window of the Fairmont Chateau Laurier ballroom, her wheelchair angled slightly away from the nearest table. 3 people had walked past her in the last 10 minutes. A man in a blazer had handed her his empty wine glass without looking down. She took it. She set it on the windowsill beside her. A man in a clean but clearly borrowed suit jacket came in, carrying a 7-year-old girl on his back, the girl's dress shoes clicking against his hip. He stopped. He looked across the room. His eyes did not stop at the wheelchair. They stopped at her face. He walked over, set the girl down, pulled out the empty chair at the nearest table, and said, "Peanut here has been threatening a bread roll for the last 40 minutes. We have room if you want to help us finish the basket." The woman looked at him for a moment. She rolled forward. 3 weeks before that evening, on a Thursday afternoon in late September, Bryce Collier was in the back of a rented panel van on Elgin Street in Ottawa, sketching measurements onto a legal pad while his daughter Rosalind sat on a folding stool eating crackers from a Ziploc bag and drawing horses in her notebook. Bryce ran a one-man accessibility consulting firm out of a shared office on Kent Street. The van was not his. He borrowed it from his neighbor on weeks when the job required tools instead of spreadsheets. This week the job required both. He had been hired by a mid-range hotel on the Rideau to assess their washroom renovations before the permit inspection. The work was straightforward. What was not straightforward was the RFP he had found 2 nights ago, pinned to the Heritage Foundation's procurement board, requesting an accessibility audit of 3 Ottawa properties owned by the Caldwell Group. He had printed it out and set it on the passenger seat, weighted down by a tape measure. Rosalind had asked what it was. He had said it was a test. She had asked if he was going to pass it. He had said probably not, but that he was going to try anyway. The deadline was in 11 days. He had walked 2 of the 3 Caldwell properties that week during public hours, notebook in his jacket pocket, writing nothing that looked official. He had timed the elevator wait on the 2nd floor of the Heritage Building on Sparks Street. He had measured the bathroom door clearance at the restaurant on the ground floor of the Caldwell Chambers with a ruler he kept folded in his back pocket. He had been doing this for 6 years, since the year Rosalind was born, since the year her mother was diagnosed. Above the folding table in the van, pinned to the metal wall with a piece of electrical tape, was a photograph of Claire. It was from the summer before Rosalind at a lake in the Laurentians. Claire was standing on a dock, laughing at something off camera, her hair wet. Bryce had not taken the photo, a friend had. He had kept it because it was the last picture of her standing. Claire had died 14 months ago in November, on a Sunday morning when the frost was on the gutters and Rosalind had been at her grandmother's. Bryce had been with her. He had been with her every day she needed him to be, and some days he had not been enough, and he had made peace with that in pieces, the way a person does when they cannot afford to be undone all at once, because there is a 7-year-old who needs breakfast. He looked at the RFP again, the Caldwell Group. He knew the name. He had done a 1-page recommendation for one of their smaller properties 4 years ago, a boutique inn in Wakefield. They had thanked him and implemented one of his 4 suggestions. He had not followed up. He had been in the middle of Claire's 3rd hospitalization. He submitted the bid anyway that Friday evening, after Rosalind was in bed, eating cold pasta from the pot over the kitchen sink, reading his own proposal for the 3rd time, and finding it honest if not impressive. That same Friday morning, across the river in Gatineau, in a corner office on the 12th floor of a glass building that overlooked the Ottawa skyline, Tessa Caldwell was already on her 2nd coffee and her 4th revision of a speech she would be giving at the Heritage Foundation dinner the following week. Her chief of operations, Frank Arsenault, came in at 8 with a folder of weekend briefings and set them on the edge of her desk. Site report from the Sparks Street property, he said. Permit office pushed the inspection to November. Also, the accessibility audit RFP closed last night. 14 submissions. Tessa picked up the folder. Anyone worth reading? Balin and Associates as expected. McRae Group. A few university research teams. A pause. 1 small independent out of Ottawa. Collier Consulting. 2-person operation, technically, though one of the 2 is listed as administrative support. What does the proposal say? It's short. Clear. The site walk section is unusual. He describes pinch points we have never had anyone name before. Frank set a single page on top of the folder. He walked the Chambers building. You can tell from the detail. Tessa read the page. She read it twice. Schedule him last, she said. She had been chief executive of the Caldwell Group for 16 months, since her father had handed her the chair at the annual shareholder meeting, and then retired to a farm in Prince Edward County and begun growing garlic with a contentment she had not seen in him in 40 years. The company owned 11 heritage properties across Ontario and Quebec. The work she cared most about was the work most of the board considered least urgent, which was the work of making buildings that had been built in 1887 navigable by people who had not been considered when the buildings were built. She had not been in a wheelchair her whole life. She had been in one for 4 years, since a cycling accident on the Gatineau Park Trail in August that had left her with a T6 incomplete spinal cord injury, 2 surgeries, 8 months of rehabilitation, and a perspective on her own family's buildings that she had not previously had and could not now unknow. The Heritage Dinner was an obligation she had not found a way to avoid. She chaired the Foundation's Accessibility Committee. She would give a speech. She would be thanked by people who would spend the remainder of the evening looking past her left shoulder when they spoke to her. She had learned to read this as a calibration tool. The people who did not do it were worth knowing. The people who corrected it mid-conversation after catching themselves were worth forgiving. The people who never noticed were people she remembered. She developed a habit at events. 15 minutes before her scheduled remarks, she would excuse herself from the donor cluster near the bar and roll to a quieter edge of the room. She told herself it was to review her notes. It was also, she had admitted to Frank once, just to breathe. He had not mentioned it again. That evening, she had been at the east window for 12 minutes when the side door opened and the man with the girl on his back came in. She had watched him scan the room. She had watched him see her. She had watched him not look away, not look through, not correct his gaze sideways. He had simply looked at her the way a person looks at another person, which was the rarest thing that happened to her in rooms like this. After he said the thing about the bread roll, she rolled forward. His name, she found out within 3 minutes, was Bryce. His daughter was Rosalind, who went by Roz, and who had very firm opinions about which bread rolls were worth the wait. The rolls at this particular dinner, Roz reported, were good but not great. Tessa said she had not tried one. Roz looked at her with the judgment of someone who had attended many dinners. "You should," she said, "before the speeches start. After the speeches they get cold." Bryce said, "Roz." Roz handed Tessa a roll. Bryce did not ask what Tessa did. He asked which part of Ottawa she had grown up in. She said the glebe. He said he had grown up in Barhaven, which was, he noted, a different understanding of Ottawa entirely. She said she had been to Barhaven once for a school volleyball tournament and had gotten lost in the parking lot for 20 minutes. He said that was the traditional Barhaven experience. She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed at an event like this in several months, and it surprised her slightly, the way unused things surprise you when they still work. At 7:45 the lights shifted. The master of ceremonies moved to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce the chair of our Accessibility Committee and Chief Executive Officer of the Caldwell Heritage Group, Tessa Caldwell." Bryce did not move. Roz, who had a second roll in her hand, looked up. Tessa set her napkin on the table. "Excuse me," she said. She rolled toward the stage. Bryce watched the chair move across the floor. His eyes found the rear frame, the profile of it, the geometry of the camber tubes, the way the crossbar sat 3 degrees off standard. He knew that geometry. He had spent 6 months studying it, the year Claire was first using one, the year he had tried to understand why some chairs let people live in them, and some chairs only carried them. He did not say anything. Roz, mouth full, looked at him. "Daddy, was that her?" He did not answer. He was still looking at the stage. Saturday morning came cold. Bryce was in the office on Kent Street before 7, before the shared space had anyone else in it, with the kettle on and the Caldwell RFP open on his laptop. He had the rear frame geometry of Tessa's chair sketched in pencil on a notepad beside the keyboard. He was not entirely sure why he was drawing it. He was sure enough to keep drawing. He opened a second tab. He searched the model designation he had seen on the frame. The search returned a patent filing from 2018, inventor listed as a design firm called Altitude Adaptive Systems. But the original concept patent, the one the 2018 filing cited as prior art, was from 2016. That filing listed a single inventor. The name on it was C. Renault. He did not know that name. He closed the tab. He pulled up his RFP submission and read it again. He did not change anything. He sent a follow-up confirmation email to the Caldwell Group procurement office and went to pick Roz up from her grandmother's by 9. That afternoon, a card arrived in the office mailbox, cream envelope, neat handwriting addressed to Miss Rosalind Collier, care of Collier Consulting. Inside, in a clear and unhurried hand, "Dear Rosalind, thank you for the very thorough bread roll review on Friday evening. I have attended that dinner 4 years running and have never had the benefit of expert guidance. I am enclosing something for your consideration. Best regards, T. Caldwell." Beneath the card, a small illustrated field guide to horses of North America, the kind purchased from an actual bookstore. The spine had been cracked once carefully, as if someone had read the first page before sending it. Bryce held the card for longer than was strictly necessary. He read it twice. He put it back in the envelope. He put the horse book on Roz's pillow without explanation and went back to the kitchen to finish making dinner. He did not add anything to his bid. He did not mention the card. He let the proposal stand exactly as he had written it. 2 weeks later, Tessa's operations director, Frank Arsenault, walked into her office with 3 folders and a coffee he had remembered to make the way she liked it. "Final shortlist," he said. "McRae Group, Balin and Associates, and Collier Consulting out of Ottawa. I've done reference calls. McRae's references are institutional, positive, and slightly vague. Balin's are excellent and slightly expensive. Collier's are 2 former clients. Both said he asked the questions no one had asked them before. One of them said, and I'm quoting directly, 'He never moved my chair without asking.' I didn't know that was something I could expect." Tessa opened the 3rd folder. "Schedule the Collier walkthrough last," she said. The walkthrough was set for a Wednesday morning at the Spark Street property. Tessa arrived at 9:55 and found Bryce already in the lobby, standing near the front desk with a legal pad and a measuring tape clipped to his belt. He looked up when she came through the door. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been expecting a door to open and had decided in advance how he would stand when it did. "Mr. Collier, Ems Caldwell." They shook hands. Frank, standing at the reception desk, pretending to read a notice board, exhaled. The walkthrough took 95 minutes. Tessa rolled. Bryce walked. He did not push the chair. He did not hold doors open before she reached them. He did not narrate what he was observing in the tone of a man explaining things to someone who needed explaining to. He asked 3 separate times where she had learned to compensate. She said what she meant. He wrote it down. They disagreed about the corridor width on the 2nd floor. He had proposed a reconfiguration of the office partitions. She said the partitions were structural on the north side. He looked at the north side. He said she was right. He did not apologize. He crossed out his note and wrote something else. They were on the 3rd floor, near the window that overlooked the Rideau Canal, when a man appeared at the end of the hall. He was 61, silver-haired, wearing a suit that had been expensive for a long time and had started to show it. His name was Gordon Pierce. He was a long-standing board member and had been with the Caldwell Group since Tessa's father had brought him on in 2009. He walked toward them with the stride of a man who believed his presence changed the atmosphere of a room. "Tessa." He glanced at Bryce the way a person glances at something they have already assessed and put in a category. "This must be your auditor." He extended a hand to Bryce without quite looking at where it was going. "Gordon Pierce, board. I'll be honest with you, we have been doing accessibility reviews at Caldwell for 11 years and I have yet to see one translate into a measurable revenue impact. I'm sure you'll give us good value for the price, but Tessa knows my view on the scope of this project." Bryce shook his hand once. "The scope is what it is," he said. Gordon smiled the way men smile when they have not been agreed with and are deciding whether to be offended. "We'll see what the numbers say." He turned back to Tessa. "I'm bringing a second firm in this week for a comparison proposal. I think the board will appreciate having options." He left. The man behind him, younger, early 30s, in a blazer that fit poorly across the shoulders, followed, but as he turned, his eyes met Bryce's for a second. Bryce recognized him. His name was Martin Uwellet. Bryce had met him once at a conference on universal design at Carleton 2 years ago. Martin had asked good questions. He had done good work then. Bryce did not know what he was doing here now. Martin Uwellet did not nod. He kept walking. When the hall was empty, Tessa said quietly, "Most consultants would have agreed with him." Bryce said, "Most consultants don't have to sleep." She turned her chair slightly so he would not see her expression. She continued down the hall. 4 weeks after the Heritage dinner, on a Thursday evening in late October, Tessa was the last person in the Gatineau office. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The city lights were starting up across the river. She was at her desk with the Collier proposal open in front of her and a cold cup of tea at her elbow. The bid was careful, the numbers were considered. The construction timeline was realistic. None of that was the reason she was still there at 9:30. It was the second paragraph of the executive summary. Accessibility is not renovation, it is original intention. She had read that sentence before. She was certain she had. She could not place it. She opened the Foundation's grant archive on her laptop. Her father had chaired the Accessibility Grant Committee before her, from 2001 to 2018. She searched the 2016 disbursements. She found a design fellowship awarded to a researcher at Concordia University. The recipient name was redacted under a legal settlement dated 2020. She switched to a public research database. She searched the fellowship year and discipline. She found a published paper. The author was listed under initials. The second sentence of the abstract read, "Accessibility is not renovation. It is original intention." She closed the laptop. She sat for a while. The canal was dark below the window, and the Parliament buildings were lit against the November sky, the way they were lit every night, indifferent to what was being decided in the buildings around them. She had read that paper. She had read it in her second year of rehabilitation, when she was looking for people who wrote about disability design the way her father wrote about heritage buildings, as something worth getting right from the first stone, not patched after the fact. She had read the abstract and kept the sentence and forgotten the initials. She had been moving, she understood now, for 4 years, through a framework someone had written before she needed it. She had not known whose. She thought of her father at his desk in the Prince Edward County farmhouse, still signing the Foundation's annual grant checks by hand because he said it was the only honest way to give money. She had asked him once how he chose the recipients. He told her he chose the ones who were not asking for recognition, just resources. That same night in a rented house in Centertown, Roz was at the kitchen table with a half-assembled model of a horse skeleton, a kit Bryce had found at a science museum gift shop and deeply regretted purchasing when he saw how many pieces it had. She had been quiet for a while. "Dad, do you think she's lonely?" Bryce put the dish he was drying back on the counter. He thought about it the way he always thought about the questions Roz asked that looked simple and weren't. "I think she's used to being careful," he said. "That's different from lonely. Mom was careful." "Yeah, she was, but she wasn't always sad. No, mostly she was paying attention." Roz considered this. She snapped a small vertebra into place on the model. "I think Tessa pays attention," she said. Bryce turned back to the sink. He did not turn around right away. He was not sure his face was ready. In the quiet of the kitchen, with the furnace running and the street quiet outside, he realized that the photograph of Claire from the Laurentians was still on the wall in the van, and that he had not taken it down, and that this felt, for the first time, like something other than neglect. 6 weeks after the Heritage Dinner in the second week of November, the Caldwell Group Board of Directors met on the 12th floor of the Gatineau office at 9 in the morning. There were 9 members at the table. Gordon Pierce sat 4 seats from the head. Tessa sat at the head. Frank sat against the wall behind her with a folder he had spent 10 days assembling. Gordon opened. He thanked the board for their time. He said he wanted to be direct, which in Tessa's experience meant he wanted to be something else, and had decided directness was the better costume. He said he had concerns about the direction of the Heritage Properties capital expenditure. He said those concerns had been confirmed by a financial review he had commissioned independently. He said he was introducing a motion of no confidence in the current chief executive and presenting an alternative audit proposal from a firm called Precision Structural Solutions, which had come in 31% lower on scope. The room did not move. Tessa folded her hands on the table. "Before we vote," she said, "I'd like the board to hear from the auditor currently under contract. He's downstairs. I've asked him to come up." Board members exchanged glances. Frank left and returned with Bryce, who was carrying a single binder and wearing the same jacket he had worn to the walkthrough, which was the same jacket he had worn to the Heritage Dinner. He looked, standing in the boardroom doorway, exactly like what Gordon wanted the board to think he was, a small operator, an easy dismissal. He spoke for 6 minutes. He did not introduce himself beyond his name. He did not raise his voice. He spoke about load tolerances in the Spark Street building's third-floor corridor. He spoke about the cost differential between two approaches to the elevator upgrade and why the lower-cost option would require a second intervention within 8 years. He spoke about two market segments the Caldwell properties had systematically excluded and what the projected occupancy lift would look like if that changed. The numbers were not dramatic. They were correct. When he finished, Gordon smiled. "Mr. Collier, I appreciate the presentation. You've clearly done thorough work for a firm of your size. But we have a competing proposal that is meaningfully more affordable and the board deserves to consider it. Would you like to address the cost differential?" Bryce opened his mouth. A chair at the far end of the table moved back. A woman stood up. Her name was Dr. Sylvie Beaumont. She was 63, a professor emeritus at McGill's Faculty of Architecture, and she had been on the Caldwell board for 7 months at Tessa's specific invitation, for a reason that had not been made clear to Gordon at the time of her appointment and was becoming clearer now. "Before this board votes," she said, "there is a matter of intellectual property the members should be aware of. The Precision Structural Solutions proposal incorporates 3 design frameworks that appear in a 2016 patent filing under the initials CR, a filing that Altitude Adaptive Systems has not licensed to Precision." Dr. Beaumont slid a folder to the board chair. "I have the documentation here. The patent holder's name was redacted in the public record under a 2020 legal settlement. I spoke with the patent office this morning. The settlement has since expired. The inventor of record is a researcher named Collier. I would ask Mr. Collier whether CR refers to a member of his research team." The room was still. Bryce said, "CR was my wife, Claire Renaud Collier. She filed the original framework under her research name. I was listed as co-inventor on the later iterations." Gordon's face did not move for a moment. Then the color went out of it. Dr. Beaumont said, "The competing proposal cannot proceed without litigation. The motion of no confidence rests on a comparison that does not hold." The no confidence motion was withdrawn in 13 minutes. Gordon was the second person out of the room. The first was Martin Nuellet, who had been sitting in the corner as Gordon's invited observer, and who paused in the doorway for 1 second on his way out and looked at Bryce with an expression that was not quite an apology, and not quite nothing. The boardroom emptied. Frank held the door and then let it close quietly behind the last member. The fluorescent lights hummed. Tessa and Bryce were the only 2 people left at the long table. Tessa did not say thank you. She said, "You sat with us that night. You sat with us." For a while, neither of them spoke. The Ottawa skyline was flat and pale beyond the window, the river a dark line between the 2 cities. "How long?" she said finally. "Have you known whose work you were auditing?" "Since the dinner. You didn't say." "It wasn't mine to say." She looked down at the frame of her chair. At the crossbar where the geometry sat 3 degrees off standard, the detail that had made Claire's prototype different from every other chair she had tested that year. "My rehabilitation center sourced it," Tessa said, "through Altitude in 2021. My father contributed to the Concordia Fellowship in 2016. He never told me. I think he didn't want me to feel that I owed a debt to someone I'd never met." Bryce nodded. "The fellowship funded the first prototype. Claire filed the framework the same year. She was a mechanical engineering PhD candidate. She was also by then 3 months into her own diagnosis. Yes, she designed the chair while she was being diagnosed. She said the 2 things were related. That she finally understood what she was designing for." "She was right," Tessa said. "This chair is the only piece of equipment I've used that doesn't feel like it was designed for someone else and adjusted for me." "That was what she was trying to fix," Bryce said. "She called it the apology problem. Everything built for accessibility was apologizing for existing. She wanted to stop apologizing and start designing." Tessa was quiet for a moment. "I read that in the abstract. I was in my 2nd year of rehab. I'd read everything I could find about design and disability, most of it written as though the person using the equipment was a problem to be solved. The abstract was different. I kept the second sentence. I didn't know the initials were a person's name, CR." Bryce set his hands flat on the table. "She kept her research name separate from our shared name. She said it was cleaner. I think she also knew the research world treated women's names differently and she didn't want to spend energy on it. She was right about that. Too was right about most things." A pause. "She died 14 months ago. November. Roz was at her grandmother's." Tessa did not look away. "I'm sorry, so am I." He moved his hand a few inches across the table, not toward her, just closer to the center. "Not an invitation. A presence. She did not move hers away. For the second time in 6 weeks, they sat together in a room without filling it with words. When Tessa finally rolled out into the hallway, Roz was sitting on a bench near the elevator, swinging her feet, eating a wrapped mint from the reception bowl. Frank was beside her, holding a coffee he had not drunk, looking at a spot on the floor with the careful expression of someone maintaining composure on principle. "Hi, Roz." "Hi, Rosalind. You can call me Roz. Everyone does except my teacher, Roz." Tessa looked at her. "Would you and your dad want to come over for dinner sometime?" "Not a fancy dinner. Just dinner." Frank looked at his coffee. "Dad makes really good soup," Roz said. "He puts apple in the squash soup, which sounds wrong, but it's actually good. Do you have a table that works?" "Like, with space?" Tessa said. "I have a very good table." Roz nodded, satisfied. "Okay." She returned to her mint. At the far end of the corridor with her coat over her arm, Bryce came out of the boardroom, and they met near the stairwell without ceremony. "You didn't have to do that," Bryce said. "The documentation was accurate," she said. "That's the only criterion I apply." "I know. Thank you." She put her coat on. She gave him one short nod, the kind that closes a subject, and took the stairs. 3 months later, the Spark Street property was mid-renovation. The third-floor corridor was open to the studs. The elevator shaft was being reframed. The lobby was a landscape of plywood barriers and taped-down cable runs and signs that said, "Pardon our progress." Tessa had developed a new habit. Every Tuesday evening, when the contractors had gone home, she came by the building in her everyday jacket with a thermos of coffee. Not as the chief executive, as Tessa. Frank did not come with her. Bryce met her at the side entrance. Roz came on the weeks when there was nothing else to ask of a Tuesday. She had been given a hard hat 2 sizes too large and a clipboard of her own, and had begun documenting material samples with a seriousness that Bryce tried very hard not to find funny and failed. She had also taught Tessa to fold a paper crane, using the brown paper that came with the new door hardware, and Tessa had become, Roz reported, a quick study. The Pierce objection was still making its way through a legal process that everyone involved expected to conclude without drama in the spring. Gordon had not attended a board meeting since November. The local business press had attempted twice to describe the situation at Caldwell as a governance crisis. Both attempts had died for lack of supporting detail. The third attempt had not been made. One Tuesday in February, the temperature dropped to -18, and the wind off the canal came through the gaps in the plywood like it had an opinion. Roz, hard hat tilted, looked up at Tessa and said, "You should come for soup." Tessa looked at Bryce. "She's been waiting for the right cold," he said. What Tessa did not know, and would not know until she arrived, was that Bryce had spent the previous Saturday building a low wooden oven at the front steps of the Centertown house. He had not mentioned it to Roz. He had not mentioned it to anyone. He had drawn it on a napkin Thursday night and built it Saturday morning, in the cold, alone, without discussion, which was the way he had always done the things that mattered. She rolled up the ramp without comment. They had soup. Lentil, not squash, because Roz had changed her mind that afternoon, and Bryce had changed the soup to match. There was bread, and there was butter, and there was apple juice in the only clean glasses, which were cartoon glasses from a gas station in 2021 that Roz had refused to let go of. Halfway through the meal, Roz fell asleep with her cheek against her arm, exactly as she did every time dinner ran past 7:30. Bryce stood without speaking, came back from the living room with a fleece blanket, and laid it over her shoulders without lifting her head. Tessa watched him do this. She watched him return to his seat. She watched him pick up his spoon and continue eating, and she understood something about the particular texture of a person who had learned to do necessary things quietly, without ceremony, without needing to be seen doing them. They sat at the kitchen table for a while after that. The February wind on the windows, the furnace ticking. "I've never had soup like this," she said. "It's just lentil. It's not the lentil." He looked at her across the table. "I know." A pause, the refrigerator hummed. Roz's breathing was even and slow under the blanket. "She left me the patent documentation," he said, "in a folder labeled for later. She knew about the altitude situation. She had tracked it. She just didn't have the time left to pursue it." He set down his spoon. "She also left a letter for Roz, for when she's older, and one for me. I read mine once. I've been going back to the last line. What did it say?" She said, "Stop making things for the past. You still have time to make things for what's next." Tessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She knew you. She knew me completely." I'm still figuring out what to do with that." Tessa reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, and set her fingers on the edge of the table where his hand rested. "You built the ramp before you knew if I was coming. Yes, that's making something for what's next." He did not answer right away. He looked at her. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are still deciding whether they can keep. "Maybe," he said. When Tessa left an hour later, Roz was still asleep. Tessa pulled her coat on in the hallway. She put her hand briefly on Roz's back, where the blanket had shifted just to settle it. Then she turned. Bryce was in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, leaning against the frame. She put her hand on his forearm just for a moment. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. She went down the ramp and into the February street, and the porch light cast long shadows from the spokes of her wheels across the snow. After she'd gone, Bryce went back inside, turned off the kitchen light, and sat for a while in the dark, with the sound of the furnace and his daughter's breathing. Then he went to the workshop space he kept in the basement and took the framed patent drawing off the shelf where it had been sitting face down for 4 years. Claire's handwriting was in the margin of the drawing, a note from the day she'd approved the final version. Just 4 words, in her fast, slanted print. "This one is right." He set the frame on the workbench, face up. He left it there. 8 months after the Heritage dinner, the renovated Spark Street property opened to the public. The press preview was held on a clear June evening when the canal was the right color, and the linden trees along the street were just past peak. There were 140 guests. Several of them had been at the Rideau Valley Heritage Foundation dinner the previous October and were doing their best to seem as though they had no particular memory of a woman near the east window who had been handed an empty wine glass. Tessa gave the opening remarks from a platform built at a height that had been specified in the contract documents from the first draft. She thanked the construction team, the architecture firm of record, the Heritage Office, the long-standing staff who had stayed through 8 months of plywood and "Pardon Our Progress" signs. She did not thank the board. Then she set down the printed program and said something that was not on it. "There is one person I'd like to acknowledge. He's listed in the project credits as lead accessibility consultant. He would have been content to stay in the credits. I'm asking him up anyway, Mr. Collier." Bryce was standing at the back of the room with Roz on one side and Frank on the other. He did not move. Roz, who had been waiting for this in a way she could not have articulated but felt entirely, put both hands on her father's lower back and pushed. Bryce walked forward. He stepped up onto the platform. He stood next to Tessa. He looked at the microphone. He looked at the room. He said, "A building that only some people can enter is only half a building. This one's finished now." He stepped back. The room stood up. The applause came unevenly at first, the way it does when a room is still deciding what it's clapping for. Then it found itself and went on for longer than anyone had planned for. Bryce kept his eyes on the back wall. At the far side of the room, Gordon Pierce was seated at a courtesy table as a remaining minor shareholder. He stood, set his napkin beside his glass, and walked out through the side exit in the particular silence of a man who knows he has no scene left to make. It was the most dignified thing he had done in 9 months. Tessa stayed on the platform. She put out her hand. Bryce took it. She did not let go through the rest of the room standing. She did not let go when the room began to sit again. She did not let go for almost 2 minutes. At the side of the room, Frank Arsenault turned to consult a seating chart that did not require consulting and kept his face aimed precisely away from everyone. Roz, who had finished her juice and was now operating on cake, climbed onto a chair to see better, which was technically against her father's rules and which at this particular moment neither of the relevant adults was prepared to enforce. In the city outside, the canal caught the last of the June light, and the Chateau Laurier reflected in the water, and a building on Spark Street that had stood for 117 years without being fully entered by a third of its potential visitors was, as of that evening, done being half-built. 7 months after the opening, on a Saturday in January, when the Ottawa cold was the serious kind and the sky was the white that meant more snow, before evening, 3 people walked along the canal pathway near the Pretoria Bridge. Roz was ahead. She had grown almost 2 inches since the Spark Street opening and had recently become very interested in bridge engineering, which she had explained to Tessa in significant detail over 3 separate dinners. She was currently attempting to explain it again to a dog belonging to a stranger, who had no opinion on cantilever design but was willing to listen. Behind her, Tessa rolled along the cleared pathway. Bryce walked at her left, close enough to be there, not so close as to be a wall. The chair was the same one she had used the night of the heritage dinner. She had been offered an upgraded model twice. She had declined both times. Meridian sent the corrected documentation last week, Bryce said. The Renault Collier framework. Generations 1 and 2. Claire's name is first on the patent record. Tessa reached over and put her hand on his sleeve for a moment. Good. She left her hand there a beat longer than punctuation required, then let it go. The foundation posted the endowment confirmation on Friday. We named it the Claire Renault Collier Fund for Adaptive Design. He had to clear something in his throat before he answered. Thank you. She should have been thanked a long time ago. Yes. They walked another stretch in silence. An older couple passed them going the other direction. The woman smiled at Tessa, not the smile of pity, the small, specific nod of recognition that passes between people who know what it means to move through a world that was not measured for them. Roz came galloping back from the stranger's dog with snow on her boots and a look of profound satisfaction. The dog's name is Henri, she announced. He is 4. He doesn't know about bridges, but he is very interested in squirrels, Tessa said. That's a reasonable set of priorities. Roz agreed and galloped back toward Henri. Tessa stopped the chair. Bryce stopped beside her. He bent slightly, not because she needed him to, but because somewhere in the past year it had become the natural way they spoke when something mattered, both of them at the same level, both of them choosing it. I didn't come to that dinner looking for anything, she said. Neither did I. I know. She looked at him. I'm not looking now either. I know. I'm just here. I know, he said again, and the third time it meant something different than the first two. The snow had started, the light kind, the kind that covered things softly and slowly and changed the way the canal pathway looked without making it harder to move through. Roz was 30 feet ahead with Henri and Henri's patient owner, explaining something with both hands. Bryce straightened and they went on, the three of them, in the particular quiet of people who have found, without looking for it, the specific temperature of a life they can share.